So we'd like to go on and get started with this wrap-up session. What we're going to do is we're going to ask each one of the groups, hopefully you have a spokesperson that will come up, and what we'd like the spokesperson to do is just a quick synopsis. So, did you come to a particular priority statement? What was it? We don't need you to go into a lot of detail. Just give us a little flavor of the conversation, and if there's a particular trajectory that your group was moving toward, I think that would be helpful to share with the group. So we're looking for probably 2 or 3 minutes from each of you, okay? So we'll just go in the order that I have them here. Distraction, who's going to come up and represent our distracted group? Okay, come on up.
Okay, so our statement is eliminate distraction as a factor in vehicle crashes. We came up with about 6,000 fatalities, 25% of crashes, the problem of underreporting, the data on the injuries, fatals, crashes, and associated crashes. The current situation, define the current state of the types of distraction, the layout of the laws, and device use, what types of device usage. Background will look at research, the extent, the use of apps, in-vehicle technologies, and the issue of cognitive distraction. Strategies, we came up with 6 different strategies. The first is regulatory, stronger state laws with the modernization and flexibility in those laws, and then cell phone versus texting laws, that is handheld bans versus the texting. Number 2 strategy, enforcement, like law enforcement training and buy-in. 3, policies for localities, governments, like workplaces. In lack of state laws, we feel the corporate policies and other policies would then step up. 4, education, schools, workplace outreach, driver's ed and testing, community outreach. 5, changing the safety culture, proactive passengers, personal responsibility. And finally, technology, the in-vehicle technologies, driver assistance technologies, device technology and apps that you can use, law enforcement, and things like the textilizer. We also have like a subset in there for like pedestrians, making sure they're aware before they're walking into the street as a part of the distraction issue. And we'll define actions to take out and carry them out.
That was great, thank you. It's always good when your first spokesperson is a perfect model for what you hope to happen, so that was great. Impairment. Who's our impairment representative? 2? Okay. Come on up.
So we started with kind of an examination over what does impairment mean today, because it did mean the 4 Ds, but there's a distraction corner. So we narrowed it down to the position statement. Do you want to read it?
I can't.
All drivers are unimpaired by alcohol or drugs or medication. Dia was in our group as well, so she pointed out over-the-counter and prescription medications as well. So we focused more on the strategies in the current situation and potential lives saved. So I'll go ahead and just talk about potential lives saved. You can talk about strategies. Okay. So we talked about there being the opportunity to save about 10,000 plus lives. That data on alcohol and drugs is underreported, so it's potential to save even more than 10,000. And then we went through a list of strategies. Sorry, we didn't really go into the background.
Okay. Thanks, Brandy. Okay, so if my eyes serve me okay, we discussed a variety of strategies for countermeasures to address substance-impaired driving, alcohol or drug-impaired driving. We talked about alcohol ignition interlocks as a deterrent, all offender interlocks as proven technology, high visibility enforcement, such as random checkpoints, We talked about the need for having assessment and screening for offenders, something that has been very successful in certain states. We heard about Virginia's efforts in that area. Medical review boards was something that we kind of discussed. As I think certainly with the idea of prescription drugs and some medical conditions, there might be a role for medical review boards, and with addiction. Let's see, my eyesight is failing me a little bit. Yeah, we have DADS. We talked, which for those of you who may not know, is emerging technology that would allow for passive detection of alcohol through either the skin or breath in a vehicle that would prevent a driver from using the vehicle if he or she had levels that exceeded what was needed or what was allowed. We talked about strengthening laws, which could involve, for example, lowering per se blood alcohol concentration levels that are allowed, or having administrative sanctions for low BAC levels, something that's been shown effective in several Canadian provinces. We talked about safe ride programs. We talked about education and outreach. And am I missing anything?
Address repeat offenders, since that's consistently been 1/3 of traffic fatalities over the years, which would include ensuring offender accountability, and then improving detection of impaired drivers, both alcohol and drugs. The other reason why you have 2 representatives up here is even in our small group of 3, we did not reach consensus. So Jana pointed out that with safe rides and public education, there's not that much research, and I pointed out with lower BAC levels that we're certainly not, there's not consensus yet on that issue, although there is research to support it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Speed. Get another twofer maybe? Come on up. Okay, great.
Hi, I've been tracking state laws with regard to speed limits for about 14 years, but I have been doing public speaking for about 14 seconds, so forgive me. We were doing speed. I think the first question that we wanted to answer was whether we agreed with the safety priority statement, and we absolutely do. It sounds great. What do we think about speed being a proposed position? Absolutely, without a doubt, we can do that. I also want to put a plug in for the Institute's research Q&A. We have an awful lot of language that you could steal from that to do a position paper. With regard to speed, why does speed matter? The very first thing that was mentioned was crash severity. At a certain speed, crash severity is a definite fatal. And so with crash severity came later was design of roadway and crashworthiness of the vehicle. So I guess a couple other topics I wanted to mention, some things that were a little bit separated from the speed limits. Road rage was mentioned with regard to high enough speed limits. If you're going too slow, you'll have a problem with that. Maybe it'll flip. I'll just catch the big ones. Let's see. Some technology that we talked about: speed cameras, infrastructure, and then road calming devices like roundabouts and speed bumps. Traffic enforcement, again, I did mention that since 2013 we've had 21 states increase speed limits, so that goes in with enforcement. And the need to humanize, people justify the aggressive driving culture. Educate, 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 and begin new drivers answering why. Make it part of their driver test. And so, and I'll just put one last one, which was funny. The older drivers do teach young drivers bad habits, so I'll try that. Thank you.
Thank you. Safety of vulnerable users.
Hello, everyone. So in the Safety of Vulnerable Users group, our safety priority statement that we came up with is collisions between vehicles and vulnerable road users, which, for context, we broadly defined to include bicyclists, pedestrians, older populations, children, so a variety of users. Collisions between vehicles and vulnerable road users can be prevented through technological innovation, context-sensitive infrastructure, and evidence-based traffic safety laws. We started to really pick into what each of these strategies entails and how they can work together to achieve prevention, which is really where we focused. So the technological innovation piece dealt largely with vehicles, things like automatic braking, better capabilities to sense pedestrians and bicyclists on the road in blind spots, those sorts of technologies. And we also briefly delved into how V2V can sort of come to incorporate these vulnerable road users through cell phones, perhaps. The context-sensitive infrastructure piece we talked about quite a bit as well. That could be anything from improved signage and lighting at intersections to increase visibility to something a little bit more widespread, such as a complete street or a road diet, some physical change to the road that allows these other users, that allows other modes to safely share the street with vehicles. That also encompasses speed reduction, curb cutouts, medians, refuge medians, and changing the operationalization of these intersections to allow more time to cross. And then finally, the evidence-based traffic safety laws piece could encompass anything from lowering speed limits to better enforcement or stricter penalties for failing to yield to motorcycle helmet laws. An important thing that came up in our discussion, though, is that many of these strategies, particularly the technological innovation piece and the infrastructure, they're both on pretty long time horizons. Each of these is going to take a long time, a lot of incremental change to be implemented. So we need to be thinking about the kinds of policies and programs that we can put into place to encourage more rapid retrofitting of our vehicular fleet and our roads. So that's something like complete streets policies that change the way the transportation planning process works, or programs that coincide with vehicle inspections to encourage these technologies to be implemented in the vehicles that are already out in the fleet. And that's where we ended. There's a lot of work to be done to protect vulnerable users. The last thing I'll say is the context-sensitive piece is really important. At the later end of our discussion, we did start to pick into some of the nitty-gritty of the needs of these vulnerable road users, and they're a very diverse group. It's multiple modes of transportation. It's multiple kinds of users. We started to talk about work zone safety. That's a very specific piece of vulnerable road users as well. So an important thing moving forward is to think about these high-level, broader prevention techniques, but also think about the specific needs of the vulnerable road users in the community in question.
Thank you. Infrastructure.
Well, good morning. This is easy, all of the above. We had a very good discussion, and we initially thought about a 3 to 5 year time frame, and then we thought in terms of some of the technology developments, that's really not a practical time frame. On the other hand, there are some things that we need to do today. So we sort of looked at the infrastructure issue as what can you do to improve the infrastructure that we have out there now in a relatively short time frame, and at the same time develop a strategy that will enhance and support technological innovation over the longer term. So I'll give you the statement, and then we'll go into a couple examples of strategies. The statement goes something like this: a national, state, and local strategy to design, fund, and implement transportation infrastructure that will improve highway safety in the short run and support technology that will enhance safety in the future. And that gets at this time issue. It's both a today, short-term issue, and a long-term issue in terms of infrastructure. So what are some examples of strategies? Well, the first is today, move toward a goal of no less than a 3-star rating under the IRAP program. And we had some experts on that that talked about this is really a comprehensive way to evaluate the safety of highways, for example. And so a minimum of 3 stars was an example of what we could move to and should move to in a relatively short time frame. In the longer time frame, the kinds of support for technology that we're talking about was to support automated vehicles and the connected car, that kind of thing. So I would invite any other members of the group that I accurately summarize the conversation. You heard the term infrastructure come up repeatedly. Definitions are really hard in this area, but we wanted to capture a holistic approach that also recognized that there are some things that we have to do and need to do right now and in the short term, as well as invest in future technology with very long-term significant benefits. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, safety culture and systems.
Hi, Joe Toole. I would say in a light way that in trying to define the scope of our focus, in some ways we're taking off of Deb's lead. I think what we were trying to find was the antidote to cultural Novocaine when you really try to figure it out. That'll be the new phrase that comes out of today's meeting. We had a great group, a very passionate group, a very diverse group. And I think the first thing that we start asking ourselves is when we talk about safety culture, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the culture of the individual driver, of the people, the pedestrians, the manufacturers? And I think all of those started coming up more and more, and particularly users. There was a lot of focus on the culture of users, but also a recognition that everyone in society has some role in affecting the safety culture, whether or not it's employers, manufacturers, everyone who is in the Hayden matrix, focusing on emergency services, law enforcement. So there's 2 components there. One is an emphasis, I think, on the user. Another one is a recognition of this broader societal impact. The second thing came up was there needs to be a change. And our initial discussion was the change needs to be that the society needs to be outraged by the problems that are being faced on the roadways. And the more we talked about it, the more we started focusing on what is the outcome. That's the immediate reaction, but what is the outcome we're looking for? And the term that seemed to emerge was one of personal responsibility or individual responsibility. So what we want to do is change the culture to the point where we have individual responsibility. And the questions, there was a really good contributions from the aviation sector about what does that really mean? How does that change occur? And a lot of it was focusing on not just changing your individual actions, being responsible for those, but being responsible for the safety on the system. So it was a recognition that individual responsibility just doesn't mean when you get behind the wheel, but it permeates the entire enterprise, if you will, of travel. And that was another point that came up was when we talked about users, we need to be careful not to talk just about drivers, but users include users of other modes. As somebody pointed out, one of the best ways to avoid crashes is not being in a vehicle that you're driving, but using bus or other modes of transportation. So it's thinking in terms of all travelers. Finally, what should be the actions? One thing was a recognition that all of these various elements of society probably have different elements of culture that need to be modified or changed. Obviously, the user, the driver, is going to be very different than the person who is managing the system or the operators of those systems. Which kind of brought us around to the other half of our conversation, which was safe systems, which we never got to. but I think the introduction was really that culture is one element of the solution, but safe systems is looking much broader at the overall. We came up with some phrases. I think that was a big step, but I think the biggest thing is we have a group of volunteers who are willing to keep working on this, and hopefully we'll come up with something that we can bring back to this group in the future. Okay, thank you.
So you all did a great job in a relatively short period of time. I think what we wanted to accomplish today is planting some seeds for potential safety priority statements that could come from the coalition. I think we've planted some of those seeds based on what you've described. I think what we need is some volunteers, as Joe alluded to in his closing remarks, that have some passion about the particular topic and are willing to work it a little bit to get it more in the format that you saw with the restraint one. So if you're one of those people that has a real strong interest and passion in one of those topics, I would encourage you to talk with the NSC staff before you leave, Susan or Jane, and just let them know so that we can work with you from the steering committee to maybe further develop into a priority statement, because it'll take some iteration and some work, I think, to get it in the form similar to the restraint one. But I thought we got a great start today, and thank you. And Deb, I'll turn it back over to you.
I told Jeff earlier that if we were in a war, he would be a general, because he always understands some of the things that are going on. The priority statement effort was something that really was a challenge for us as a group to think about how do we bring people together, and Jeff really saw how to help put some of that together. And what we hope is that we're going to have some additional statements that are going to come out from this group. And we have almost 300 members at this point. If we can all speak with one voice on some issues, not on everything, but on some issues, that will be very powerful. I know we're getting close to lunchtime, but I just want to say thank you to all of you who participated in this exercise. Hopefully, as Jeff said, it's going to result in next steps. And I noticed that we started off with Jennifer and we ended with Joe. We had a lot of great presenters in between. And when Jennifer started talking about distraction, that's something that's been very close for some of us for a number of years. And certainly, when I was at the NTSB, that was an issue that was really just emerging. We didn't have a standard protocol or practice for preservation orders and making sure that that was data and information that we were grabbing when I came in 2004. By the time I left in 2014, things had really changed. So when we look at the conversations that we had this morning with Chuck and with Peter about how things evolve and how we have to adapt and change, there's a lot that's going on, and we are adapting and changing. But we ended the presentations with Joe talking about cultural norms and safety systems. And one of the things that he said is, it's about all of us. And we all can do better. And I think I hold the mirror up for myself for sure on this. And this morning I got out of a car and they let me off across the street. And, you know, of course the taxi cab drivers are looking for the address on the building. And I realized that I have a responsibility. I have an opportunity to create a safer environment for myself and for other people. And Jennifer started with distraction, and I knew I had to be a self-advocate for distraction many years ago. And so when I get into a car, an Uber, a taxi, somebody else is driving, I say, can you please not use your phone, you know, while you're driving me? And I've realized over a few trials and errors, because when you try to tell them not to use their phone when they're actually using it, it doesn't usually go very well. So it works pretty well if you ask them please and do it right on the front end of the trip. And then you'll often hear the phone ring, and most of the time they'll ignore it if you've kind of created this deal with them. And I realized, why don't I do that on other things? This morning, the cab driver let me out in the middle of the block. And all I have to do is say, would you mind letting me out at the crosswalk? Would you mind letting me out at the intersection? And Joe, thank you for reminding all of us, that we have some personal responsibility and we can do things differently. And, you know, that means holding up the mirror and kind of being the change that you want to help other people see. So today we've had a lot of great work. We had great speakers this morning. Chuck, I have a 2005 Toyota Sienna minivan. It is very dirty. No, you don't have to wash it, but it did make me think about when we talked, you showed the chart about penetration of technology and how long it takes for things to turn over. I am that average, you know, the cars today, people have cars for 11 years. I do have one of those cars, and I just saw IHS's release on the adaptive headlights, and I sent a note to my husband, and I said, we need a new car. And, you know, and I think that there's so many things that coming to these meetings makes us think about. You made me think about my car and the technology and kind of how that turnover happens. Peter, he just made me think about a lot of things, including where my milk comes from. But you know, we have these great speakers, and they really help us to think about things. And we don't always want speakers to come, and we don't want their positions to be monolithic. We want them to challenge us. We want them to bring new ideas and thoughts. And we want to create a dialogue that ultimately advances us down that road to zero. We are super excited about all of you all. The people who are sitting here thinking through, working through these things, from government agencies to the private sector, we are going to be kind of the hidden figures. This is what I'm trying to get everybody to think of. When things change, there's a lot of people behind that people don't see and that they don't know. And you all are the people who are going to be the hidden figures behind us getting to zero. And so really excited about what we're doing. Our next meeting is going to be October 12th. It's our one-year anniversary. We're really excited. We're going to work to get some high-level folks to participate in that meeting with you, and look forward to having a celebration and potentially making some time to hear from our grant recipients and the awesome work that they're doing as well. We know that everyone's really interested in that. So thanks again to Kaiser for allowing us to use this space for free. It's a tremendous gift to us. And thank you all so much for your valuable time and energy. Our team will be up here, Susan and Jane. If you all want to continue some work, as Jeff suggested, on the priority statements, we're happy to help facilitate that if you all can take a leadership role in some of those different spaces. We stand adjourned. Everybody be safe out there. Have a good summer.